Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Doctor to Doctor in the chat room. I am part of your host, Dr. Rhonda Shaw, and we have the other part of our hosts in the chat room, and we are gearing up for another great discussion and hopefully a very informative discussion that will be beneficial to you guys. As we always say when we start the show, we are still in the midst of a pandemic, so we hope that you guys are staying safe and that you are using the necessary precautions to stay safe, as in wearing your mask and physically distancing yourselves when you have to be out and about. And we just encourage you, if you can, get vaccinated. If you don't know where to go to get vaccinated, you can just go to tn.gov, and there are sites all over Tennessee where you can go and get your vaccination. So just think safe and be safe, because we want to see you guys when we're on the other side of this. Last Saturday, when we were here, we were celebrating daughters. This week, we were celebrating sons. So I want to send a shout out to my son, Ronnie. Salute to you, Ronnie. I love you, and I'm very, very proud of you. I know that Dr. West wants to do the same. I don't know if our guest has a son. When she comes in momentarily, she may want to do the same, but I want to say a huge shout out to my son, Ronnie. And today, before we get started, let me just say hi to my co-host, Dr. West. How are you?
I am doing well, lady. I'm excited about our topic today. And yes, let me send a quick little shout out to Jackson, my awesome little 6-year-old. We just had parent-teacher conference today, and he is doing amazing. She couldn't say enough about how sweet and how good and kind and how smart he was. So that did my heart proud this morning. So awesome. I'm in a very good mood.
Awesome. Well, we have a very special guest. I had her on back in December, and we were talking about the overall impacts of the pandemic on the workforce. We talked a lot back then about unemployment, and people were, concerned about where their benefits were, and I've applied and I haven't heard anything. And she was giving us some really good tips and strategies on how to navigate through those challenges. And today we have her back again to talk about the state of the workforce, the current workforce, as we are still in the midst of a pandemic. I have Deputy Deniece Thomas. How are you?
I'm doing well, Dr. Shaw. So glad to be with you again.
Yes, we are glad to have you. If you would do what you did last time, you just kind of gave us a little bit about you, and then we'll just kind of move into the discussion. And you might have to need to do some shout outs too. If you do, you go right ahead.
Absolutely. I have to give a shout out to my son, Trenton Thomas II, who is a senior at the University of Alabama. So sending him some love from Tennessee to Alabama. Awesome. I absolutely love him, and he's an amazing young man. Thank you for letting me do that.
Yeah.
Yes, and so happy to meet Dr. West, who I didn't have the opportunity to meet the last time I was with you. So happy to meet her as well. And you listen, I'm a fairly simple person. I'm an Alabama girl, born and raised, transplant Tennessean. I've been in Tennessee since 2006 as a part of the workforce. It's been my background for 25 years. Absolutely love serving the people of Tennessee. I started my career with the Department of Labor in 2007. And that started from right in the American Job Centers, of which you have several great facilities in Memphis. And from there to Deputy Commissioner. So my journey is very real and very practical. So there's not a whole lot I've not seen in the space of workforce. So I'm just glad to be able to help Tennesseans find what they would like to do in life and help them get there.
Yeah. So let's talk about Tennessee. Let's talk about where we are. The pandemic has changed the landscape of Tennessee's workforce. So let's talk about the major differences today compared to 19 months ago.
Wow, it's hard to believe it's been 19 long months. When this started, we saw such a rapid sort of deployment of everyone home. And we saw the service industry primarily be disrupted tremendously. Obviously, in a public health emergency, a lot of those folks could not do what they were doing. And, in 19 months later, I think we've seen some return to folks working, but not as we had anticipated, quite frankly. We still see some industries still severely disrupted. We see, need work, need workers, hiring signs all across Tennessee. But that's certainly more prevalent in some of our industries that I'm sure we'll talk about more in our discussion. And so in some ways, I would say that we have seen some industries that have sort of stabilized, and we are seeing some that are quite in flux even 19 months later.
Yeah. Wow.
Do you think that employees working remotely will become a permanent part of the work week for many companies when we return to, what's a normal work environment? Do you think we'll go back to we'll stay with the working remotely?
I think it's a mixed bag, but I would tell you overwhelmingly, and I would say this even just within our own agency. A lot of folks have fallen in love with working from home, and they love the flexibility.
I definitely.
And we've seen employers even move away from some of their brick and mortar locations. I mean, we've seen it across the country. Folks are selling brick and mortar locations to save costs, because what we found was we didn't lose productivity with this new construct. Folks were able to work from home and take care of kiddos that were out of school and learning virtually, and still be able to be productive. And so I certainly think working remotely is with us. I don't think this is a passing fad. I think there's something to be said about what that sweet spot is, relative to in-person versus remote working. But I do think this will be a part of our new normal.
Yeah, because I know for me, I had to find some boundaries because I overworked from home. I found myself working from, the time I got up to the time I went to bed, still attending to emails. So, I can see where productivity was probably a whole lot better. But it still seems that there are certain institutions that are not, they don't really want to go in that direction, when I can see where the brick and mortar and not having all the bills and the utilities and all of that, surely that helped. But I don't know what it is where it seems like some people are like, wow, we see this really works and we can do this. And then there are others that are like, nah, we want to see you. We want you in the building.
Yeah, well, I think there's some unique challenges, and you brought up a couple of those, Dr. Shaw. When you're home, you don't get to leave the work, right? So it's very easy to jump back on the emails because there's no real line of separation between the work and yourself. Whereas when you leave the office, you kind of leave those things behind and you move on. I think there's a lot of reluctance because a lot of companies are still trying to figure out, well, what happens if I send my workforce home, particularly now when everybody needs a workforce so critically. And so I think, listening to employees help. I certainly think for us, we have heard from a lot of employers that say where possible, remote work is not possible in every facet, but where possible, I think everyone has been a little bit surprised at the level of engagement. But there is a challenge in trying to keep your workforce engaged. It's not like sitting in a room and being able to vibe and have that synergistic relationship. So you really have to be intentional about doing things to keep workers involved and engaged and informed. So a really solid communication strategy is needed, and also getting clever, things like virtual coffee breaks and virtual lunch breaks. Those things help to simulate what would be an in-person work experience.
Yeah, because I think another biggie for me personally was self-care, right? Because I was so engrossed in the work. And just getting it done. I mean, if anything came up, it's like, I'm going to get it done now. I won't have that to worry about tomorrow, right? The next thing you're kind of slacking on how you take care of yourself.
Sure.
Statistics show that many people have chosen to retire during the pandemic. I particularly know in education that a lot of teachers that that's one of the areas that's really struggling right now. It's a challenge. So how has that really impacted the workforce?
Yeah, I think, statistically, we saw in the data that 2021 will be the year that the greatest number of baby boomers will retire. And that leaves a lasting imprint on the workforce because that's a lot of experience that will walk away. And without having a healthy, robust pipeline to refill that, you lose a tremendous amount of knowledge and expertise that it really takes years to get back. The pandemic, you brought up self-care, and I think self-care has also led to a lot of reflection as well. So we find that a lot of workers in Tennessee have started to think, do I really want to do this? or was I really happy in that particular occupation or company prior to the pandemic, right? But because we all move so fast and move so often, the pandemic really caused us to slow down and really think about choices and be more deliberate about what we want to do. And so that led to some folks retiring that maybe were contemplating retirement before. And some people just saw this as, well, this is a probably good place to sort of hang my hat right here. But also folks that are leaving industries and sectors that they've been long trained and long been a part of, to really do things that bring them more fulfillment and joy. And so we're seeing sort of a mixed bag. So yes, we're seeing record number of retirements, but we're also seeing folks pre-retirement age really thinking about where do I want to go next? And sometimes that's not an immediate decision. We're seeing people kind of sit on the sidelines and really put some time into thinking about that before they do. And so we continue to see career exploration and guidance being two critical things that are really needed in the workforce, because people are really between sort of thinking about, is this right for me? And is this something that I want to do for the next 10, 15 years, understanding the backdrop of what we continue to go through with the pandemic.
I also wonder if this time people have taken to say, maybe this is a good time for me to take a break from work, maybe go back to school, maybe, work on a second career, or, even those people who might be retiring. I know a lot of people who say they will never actually retire. They will always want to continue to, to do something. So I wonder if part of the issue in everyone looking for a job has been that either people are retiring or people have decided to take a break and go back to school to maybe start a second career. Do you know if that has anything to do with the lack of people in the workforce today?
I think it's all of those things, Dr. West. And quite frankly, I would say, particularly for those who have kids that are school age, it's been pretty cool to be able to be home with your kids, and you miss that. And so I think family has played a key part in that as well. I think folks are saying, listen, how cool is it to go to a parent-teacher conference or be able to go to the park with my kid during a work day, which I typically would not be able to do. And so I think it's really a mixed bag. I think it's all of those things, right? And what I do think is that we have a much more informed workforce than what we had prior to the pandemic. People are really, really actively participating in their own career path, in their own growth, in their own space. Whereas when you're typically, with an organization, you kind of go where the promotion takes you. I think a lot of folks are kind of taking back that power over their career and really being more intentional about where do I go next and what does that look like for me, whether that's sitting inside a post-secondary institution or whether that's getting a short-term training or whether that's starting my own business as well. I think all of those things really have an impact on where we are right now.
Yeah. You also mentioned being at home with your kids, and it's interesting. I feel like every time I speak to someone, a representative from some sort of agency, whether it's the bank or Best Buy, even, I've had multiple people say to me, if you hear my kids in the background, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I've got a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, and it's just part of our daily life now, just knowing. Or the dog, yes. Just knowing that people are at home with their families. And, I think we are all in this together. And so I think we all understand and give a lot of grace to each other. But it's just such a different time. It's just not something that I've ever experienced before. I found myself complimenting somebody on their mask the other day, and I thought to myself, did I just say that? So it's just such a weird and interesting time to be, part of the workforce and working from home and schooling kids from home, and it's just such an interesting time.
Yeah, but how cool is it though for us to see ourselves as being several things versus one thing, right? Because in our careers, we've kind of seen ourselves as just that. But now what I think is raised is that how agile and resilient the Tennessee workforce really is. And so how cool is it that I can answer my emails, have a virtual meeting, get big deals done, and still be able to help my kid with their homework or get an early
do it in my slippers.
And do it in my slippers. So I think it's brought about versatility that, quite frankly, we probably didn't give ourselves enough credit for in the beginning. But now we're able to fill multiple buckets, right? And I think that's something that has also really kind of spurred some thinking about, or maybe I can do some things that I thought I couldn't do before. Because if you can manage and really meet the challenges we've had during the pandemic, I'd say you're a pretty resilient person, and you're much needed in our workforce.
Yeah. Commissioner, could you speak to how succession planning, or even the lack thereof, has impacted the workforce, particularly manufacturing?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think, as talking about retirement and folks that are leaving industry, it is so critical to talk about succession planning. Even when things are, quote, great, we got to talk about what comes later. When we start to see certain industries not being as attractive, because I think that's a very cyclical thing, we have to make sure that when we're getting in workforce, that we're starting to open up opportunities for folks to train and do in their, and become a part of their own career progression. Because if you don't, you'll find that folks leave and there's no one there to really pass the baton to. So succession planning is as critical as training someone to be efficient at their job.
Right.
We have to really think about what does that up cycle look like within an organization to make sure that we have a strong bench. In sports, it's important to have a starting team, but you got to have a strong bench. It's the same in workforce. So we got to make sure that that happens. And that's something that's a must have. And I certainly hope that industries are really planning for that right now, particularly in things like manufacturing, where, lost production cannot happen in a lot of our industry across the state.
And is it happening a lot now?
I still think it's a scary concept. I still think it's a scary concept for folks to start thinking about, who will replace me? Most people don't want to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But it's a conversation we have to have. And it gets scary for your workforce, because when you start talking about, well, who's going to be up next, people go, am I being replaced?
Yeah.
It's not about replacement. It's about replenishment, right? It's about sustainability. And that's something that has to become a more comfortable topic to have inside business.
And sustainability is, relevant across the board. Not just.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can't be selfish. It's not just us having a job for today, but what happens to create opportunities for the future.
Right. We want to talk more about the current workforce in Tennessee when we come back from break. We're going to go to break, and we'll be back in just a moment. And we're back on 94.7 FM. We're here with Deputy Deniece Thomas of the Tennessee Workforce Development, and my co-host, Dr. West. We are talking about the current workforce of Tennessee and everything surrounding that and what's going on during this pandemic. You guys have been sending me messages about having all these different questions, about jobs. And I know that I see hiring. We're hiring everywhere I go now. So everybody's wondering what's really going on in Tennessee. So let's talk about it. How has the pandemic impacted entrepreneurship? Are there more folks starting businesses now and just leaving the traditional workplace altogether?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. We looked at data, end of year last year, and what we saw was at the same time in 2019, we saw an increase of about 1,500 plus new businesses start at the end of 2020. So the second half of 2020 was really strong for Tennessee in the space of entrepreneurship, which is really interesting because, one would think that's a scary time to start a business. But I think what happens as these things start to come around is, well, here's an opportunity for a business or a product or a service that maybe didn't present itself prior to the pandemic. And so we are seeing a lot of incubation in business startups, which is great, because we know most of the job growth comes from existing businesses, not new businesses necessarily coming in from outside of the state. So it's great to always have new businesses and expanding businesses within our borders. And so we believe that there is absolutely more opportunity for entrepreneurship, particularly among minorities, among young adults, because this is a very fierce and brave generation. And so we certainly think we'll continue to see a climb in entrepreneurship. And just, really want to just take the time here to shout out our Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, who has tremendous resources along with Small Business Association to help folks that are thinking, well, maybe I've had an idea, but not really sure how to bring it home. Wonderful resources out there to take part in to kind of help you get a business plan and get started.
Oh, wow. That's pretty neat.
Speaking of, yeah, that is pretty neat. Speaking of that, what kind of business would you think would make the most sense to try to start during a pandemic? You know, my mind doesn't think like that. I just know a restaurant probably is not a good idea. But what types of businesses might
No,
work?
I get what you're saying with that, but I think, I heard her say, we're in this, and people started thinking, oh, this may be a good idea. For instance, I know the girl that has done my hair for many, many years. She's very crafty. She immediately started selling masks, making her own sanitizers, these creative things with sanitizers. I'm just saying, because she did hair and she could not work anymore, right? She had to find something that did work so that she could continue having income.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it may be what, somebody's probably thinking way beyond that, but I hear her because I saw so many people say that, man, oh, I can do this now. People need this now.
Right. Just being creative and thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would say folks that thought about any type of in-home service, because people were really super nervous about going to salons or going places where they would typically get personal care. So folks saying, I'll come to you. Like, that was a pretty neat idea. It kind of almost made you feel like a celebrity, right? Because you can have a glam team come to you. So I think that was important. And also just as simple as, I saw young people go, I'll go to the store for you. So if you're a little apprehensive and maybe you don't want to use a delivery service, I'll do a store run. I'll pick up the milk and the bread and the eggs and I'll bring it for folks, or even folks that wanted to just start tutoring, right? Because we saw such complications for parents going, I don't know how to be the teacher. I know how to be the mom and the dad, but I don't know how to be the teacher. And so we saw a lot of folks do tutoring startups to say, I'll come help your kid with math or science, and I can do that in a safe space where you're comfortable. Maybe you don't want to take them into a business where there's multiple kids, but one-on-one learning, but a great ratio. So there's all kind of neat things that really start to come out as a result of the pandemic that most people would not have thought there was marketplace for before. So to your point, I think creativity and necessity breeds a lot of invention, right? And so we start to see that, and people start going, well, maybe this is not a one-off. Maybe this is an opportunity to formalize this, and it became at first a supplement to income, and maybe can become the main thing. And that's exactly what we want to see happen, not just in our state, but around the country, that people start thinking creatively about how they can take care of themselves and their families.
I had just jotted that down about the deliveries. That was a big deal for me because I basically didn't go out. I mean, in the peak of the pandemic, I basically didn't go out. I had everything delivered to me. And I thought, man, delivery services must be really, really doing well right now, because I knew a lot of people were doing that, from groceries to anything else imaginable. They were having things delivered.
Yeah. I don't spend any time in the grocery store these days. Everything gets delivered. So it's really convenient, especially if you are nervous about being out and about. But then, you have those concerns of, well, what am I bringing into my house that someone else may have,
For me, I think I saw how convenient it was. And even now that I'm not as concerned, I mean, that things have kind of, calmed down a little. And I know the Delta variant is kind of amping up now, but I'm still doing some of the same things just for the convenience, just for the convenience alone. Yeah. Let's talk about the specific industries like hospitality and retail that are having a difficult time finding workers now. What happened to the workers that they had before the pandemic? Where did they go?
Yeah, hospitality, our friends in hospitality have had a difficult time. I think we are seeing it slightly get better for them, but it certainly has not returned to pre-pandemic levels. As you can imagine, folks in restaurants and hotels and service industries were hardest hit by far for obvious reasons. And again, I think really going back to what we discussed earlier is that folks were going, do I really want to go back into an industry that I know is going to be not just the hardest hit, but the first hit, if there is a resurgence in COVID or anything else that happens in the way of public health emergencies. And so people are starting to think maybe there's a safer path for me to take that gives me a little bit more sense of security and stability that works for me and my family long term, right? And so I think that has anchored a lot of concerns that we're seeing. And also, too, I think there's, to your point, a lot of fear about your own well-being and safety in some of those occupations. And so we're seeing what we call reallocation friction, right? So you had a surplus, or at least you were stable in one area where there was workforce, and now you're porting over to another occupation or industry sector, and it's causing some friction because in some ways you're like, great, we get more healthcare workers. But then hospitality goes, yeah, but you took the workers that we needed. So there's a little bit of friction among right now, where people are deciding to go. And I think, again, a lot of that is driven by your own personal situations and circumstances, safety, stability, security, all of those things play a part in that. And so I can tell you the hospitality industry, particularly around retail, the Grocers Association, we started working with those folks very early into the pandemic. I mean, as early as March and April. We created the Tennessee Talent Exchange to try to get individuals into the grocery stores to stock shelves when there were critical items that were needed. And so we knew this sector would need a lot of hands-on work. And that helped, but we are seeing, again, folks not returning at the levels that they left. And so I've seen such creativity from this sector as well. We've seen things from as small as increased wages to allowing more flexibility in scheduling to attract people to come back to hospitality to provide opportunities. I know we'll talk about apprenticeship a little later on, but we're seeing opportunities for apprenticeship in this sector to say, well, okay, I get it. You don't want to be a server and you don't want to be a server forever, but here's an opportunity to fast track to maybe being a restaurant manager or a hospitality manager. So I think, the folks in the Hospitality Association have done a really great job looking internally at what some of their workforce challenges were and are, and trying to come up with clever ways to recruit folks back to that sector and provide more mobility for them, both economically and personally, so that they can sort of right size themselves while we're very much still in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah, I was just in Indiana last weekend, I think, for a wedding, and passed this Hardee's and the fast food place. Mm-hmm. And there was a sign that said, we're offering $5,000 sign-on bonus.
Wow.
I thought, wow. Yes, I thought, and I mean, and that was to me some indication of just how crucial things are. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, and that's something that would have been unheard of, right, prior to the pandemic.
That's why, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that carrot really to get folks interested in coming to work, both just out of dire need, but also as an opportunity to maybe recruit a different type worker to the service industry that maybe wasn't really thought or sought after before. It's very plausible. I'll give you an example. I was in the eastern part of the state, and it was so cool because I really get excited about seeing youth go to work, but seeing kids at 14, 15, right, working at the local fast food place, and you didn't see a lot of that prior to the pandemic. And immediately, I see this, and I had to make sure they didn't think I was asking from a regulatory perspective, but I saw these really bright, smiling faces, and I said, "Wow, how neat!" And one of the workers that was there, so they're 15, and I'm kind of working with them, and I thought, how cool. And so, again, our agency is really working with employers to help them understand you can hire young people to work, and a lot of the young folks want to work, and they get some critical skills that they need to be able to have a job. And so, whereas we're seeing some loss, obviously, in this sector, I think we're also seeing an opportunity for renewal as well, because just the wages have shifted tremendously, particularly among restaurants. And so I think as we start to see things get better with the variant and COVID overall, we will feel migration back. It may be a slower migration back, but I think we'll see it, and it'll get better as time progresses.
So kids can start as early as 14?
They can. Kids can start early, as 14 or 15. Now, obviously, it's industry specific. It's a lot more benign to have someone, getting a milkshake at a restaurant. I almost called a name, but didn't want to look like I was endorsing.
Yeah.
Much easier to have a young person get a milkshake at a restaurant than having them on a production floor, right? So there's some obvious hazards. But our division within our department, workplace regulation and compliance, actually has consultants that can help companies really determine what's best suited for a young adult, some work activities for a young adult to engage in. What are the hours? Because obviously we want to make sure school is the most important thing. And so we have consultants that can help folks really, really sit down and determine what a path should look like for a young person. So employers don't have to go out it alone and break the rules, because then we'll be having a different conversation with them.
Yeah.
So we want to be there to kind of help them on the beginning.
Yeah.
So if I'm a 14 or 15-year-old and I'm looking to get into the workforce, what exactly do they have to do these days? I remember when I got my first job, I think I was 14 or 15, I had to go to school to get the work permit and then start, applying. So is that still the process, or do kids just go and apply? Is there anything else that they need to do before that?
Yeah, there are a lot of occupations where kids don't need a permit. There's obviously some information that we need to collect, because again, we want to make sure that we're putting kids in the safest environment possible, and that the hours that they will work will be conducive to what they're learning, and what they're both learning on the job, but more importantly, what they're learning in secondary school. But the other thing is there are structured programs as well, formalized programs that's called work-based learning that it has been established in Department of Education along with our department for some time. And what this is that, kids are really getting sort of the career and technical aspect of work, and then going to do things like actual work experience.
Okay.
And that's happening in a lot of different industries across the state. We actually have formalized youth programs where kids are like, I'm in school, and then I go and I earn a fairly competitive wage in the afternoon. And so there's these informal programs that can kind of just naturally and organically take place in the community without a whole lot of paperwork or permitting. But then there are also structured programs that can happen. And those are usually lead-ins to more formalized career paths that will take a young person from work-based education all the way through post-secondary.
Wow.
Yeah, I know when I'm going into places and I see the really young kids now, I'm always intentional about being very patient. I think the mother comes out in me, and I'm I'm very proud to see them in the workforce and, doing something responsible with their lives and something structured with their lives. Yeah.
And it's really great, I think, for kids to learn at that young age how much joy and how much accomplishment having a job and
money and budgeting and
contributing
early.
to society. Yeah, there's all of that that's wrapped up in working, and there's a lot of fulfillment in that. So it's great to see them learning that pretty early.
Yeah.
Yeah, and parents are super excited, because guess what? You get to buy those sneakers yourself. Right? So you get to do some of that, but it does. I mean, it puts a big smile on my face. And I'm with you, Dr. Shaw. It's the mom in me. I love to see young people working, because we know when young people are working, they're doing something productive, and that's less of a chance that we are losing kids to violence or criminal activity or those types of things.
Yeah.
And so it's very rewarding to have them in those structured spaces, and it does bring a sense of pride and dignity early. I mean, think about our first experience with work. I've said this countless times to various audiences. Our first experience with work was chores.
Yeah.
It was chores.
Yeah.
And what we found in our country, unfortunately, is that kids don't do chores like they used to, right? But and so how you learn work is by doing it. And so being able to show up on time and do things and follow instructions, and those things are very critical, and really help really embed some critical workforce skills that's going to be needed as they get older.
Yeah.
So you spoke a little bit to this earlier, but what is the state doing to cultivate a new workforce? And are there non-traditional groups of workers that employers can tap into to help fill some of these positions?
Thank you so much, Dr. West, for asking this question, because I tell you, this is where I get so excited. We've talked a little bit about obviously our youth and how we can get them in and get them involved. But I would tell you, there's so many other groups that are kind of on the sidelines that we want to get in the game. And I'll start first with ex-offenders, right? We have our next workforce right now is sitting behind walls. And I call them our next workforce, not our offenders, but our next workforce.
Awesome.
These are folks that are more than capable and often very willing to go to work. And so we have tremendous reentry programs that you'll be hearing more and more about to help provide structured learning and training while folks are incarcerated, so that when they reenter their communities, there's jobs waiting for them and they have the high skills needed for the demand. And so really, really want to just kind of, shout it to the mountaintop. It's not just about second chance employment, it's about opportunity for all. And so this is a group that probably couldn't stand a chance before, but right now, with the need so great, that employers are opening in their doors and allowing these folks to come in and have an opportunity. Yeah.
We recently had someone on the show that had spent I think 9 years in prison and that had been exonerated. And he is really working hard on the reentry piece for people that have been incarcerated. Yeah, that's great to hear.
So needed.
Absolutely. Yes, it is. More to come on that for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have to take a break, but we will be right back with more from Miss Deniece Thomas on 94.7 FM. Stay with us. And we are back. Thank you for staying with us on Doctor to Doctor in the chat room. We are still here with Commissioner Deniece Thomas, and she is giving us the lowdown on the workforce here in Tennessee. So I want to switch gears a little bit and ask about adult education. Can you talk a little bit about how the role of adult education, what that role is in producing a more qualified workforce?
Absolutely. And Dr. West, I will tell you, we have been very intentional over the course of the last several years in our department to really rebrand what adult education is across our state. Most people think of adult education as that's where I get my GED, or in Tennessee, we use the HiSET. But it's so much more than that, because we can actually serve individuals that already have a high school diploma and or HiSET. Adult education at its core is about literacy. It's about helping people get better and more fluent. And so currently in adult education, it's not just allowing someone to get a high school equivalent credential and that's it. But we've shifted our focus to work-based education. And what that looks like is, while individuals are pursuing their high school equivalency, they're already starting to learn critical workplace skills and also have an opportunity to work in business and industry to put these skills into practice. And so we have what's called integrated education and training. And we have multiple programs across the state. And what this looks like is, while someone is getting their high school equivalency, they're already working in that space. And so we know that there has to be throughput, right? Adults cannot just simply finish a thing before they start something else. There has to be side-by-side experiences, because that really expedites success. And so that's what we're doing with adult education. So they do tons of that work. Adult education really is a primer for apprenticeship. They're doing pre-apprenticeship programs to stage and help folks get ready to kind of take on some of those critical jobs that are needed both now and in the future. And lastly, they help businesses where we may have workers, and I'll use fast food again. We'll go back to restaurants. Maybe there's a person who's operating the cash register who comes up short night after night, right? And the employer goes, well, obviously it's not staff, but what's wrong? Why can't Deniece balance at the end of the night? Well, Deniece may need some help with math, with basic math. And so adult education can come in and work seamlessly with that employer to say, we can provide some math literacy work skills for your workforce at no cost, to help raise the level of efficiency that helps the employer and obviously helps the individual. So now they're not fearful about losing their job because there was an area that they quite frankly didn't feel real proficient in. And so those are some of the many things that adult education can do to support both the individual and business.
That's really interesting. I was the director of an adult education program many, many moons ago. And So just to clarify, so I know that kids can start to work as early as 14. Was there a time when having a high school diploma was required of someone 18 or older to get a job? I mean, was that ever a requirement?
I think it was more along industry, business. Business really sets the demand. I mean, obviously, we want our kids to have a high school diploma. We know that it's the most foundational but necessary credential that one can earn.
Mhm.
However, life happens to our
Sure,
kids and life
sure.
happens to adults, and they need a
Mhm.
path to get back on the right side. I will tell you, we do see employers, and particularly now with the workforce demand being so critical, is that they will hire on someone without a high school diploma or equivalency. But what I like to tell businesses is think about the person as a whole and holistically, even if you hire them without a high school diploma or equivalency, in order for this person to have the best lot in life, let's work to get that done while they're working. And
Mhm.
so we've seen a lot of employers offer this to workers while they're working. So they're able to earn and then work on getting their high school equivalency at the same time. That's a much better model for us because we know still the data shows us if you have a high school diploma or equivalency, your earnings are going to be higher. You're going to be less likely to suffer things like layoff or terminations. And
Mhm.
so it's still important to do that. But I think there's a way that we can do it in combination
Yeah.
um, and not necessarily segment success. I think we can do it all together.
Mhm. I think it's awesome. I'm just really awesome because, as opposed to them being in a program like that, and just sitting around waiting to pass a GED exam in order to be able to be in the workforce. So I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and because I don't test well, does that mean I'm not competent? And
Right.
and I think that's really been the resurgence for adult education is, let's not focus on what someone didn't get,
Yeah.
but let's focus on what they have and how do we turn that
How
into
do
wins.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
That more strengths-based approach. I love that.
absolutely, absolutely.
I heard a story about, and this is not necessarily workforce related, but higher education. Some schools have decided not to hold the SAT scores, so make them be so critical for acceptance.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a great point. If you don't test well as a traditional student or as an adult learner, that can really limit your opportunities, your the thing, getting a job or being placed somewhere. And so I think that that's a really great. It sounds like a really great program that will prioritize people's talents versus
Yeah.
their ability to take a GED exam. So I love that.
Yeah, we have some exciting things coming down the pike, Dr. West and Dr. Shaw. I can't speak on it just yet, but you'll have to promise to get me back on the show when we do, because I think
Absolutely.
you'll really be excited about the path that we're looking to undertake here shortly.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So the state has put a lot of effort into creating registered apprenticeships programs. You kind of talked about that a little bit and showing the benefits of becoming an apprentice. Why are apprenticeships a key part of the state's workforce development strategies?
Yeah, great question. Apprenticeship is an oldie but a goodie.
Mm.
It's been around for a very long time, but it's a proven model. Earn and learn. We just really highlighted instances of that. When you can earn and learn, it's a much better model. Adults can't necessarily commit to just being in the classroom. They have mortgages, they have their rent, they have kids. And so when you can do those things simultaneously, it really does help to bring better outcomes. What I love about apprenticeship is that at its core, it adds rigor. And whereas we know employers have sort of these informal training programs to help people learn skills inside their respective business or industry, they're often not portable. And so, yes, you've trained me to be really great, but that's only as good as your company. What happens when I leave? Apprenticeships allows portability of credentials, which means wherever you go across the country, if it's a registered apprenticeship, the same rigor applies. And that's important because people don't often stay where they've always been. And so it allows you to be successful no matter where you go. The other thing about apprenticeships is that because it's such a structured model, it rewards proficiency. So year one as an apprentice, there are certain benchmarks that you'll hit. And so as you hit those benchmarks, you've earned, there's a sense of pride, but you also get an increase. So every year that you're in an apprenticeship program, you earn, you get a pay increase. You earn, you get a pay increase. And so often when apprentices have completed their program, they have very super competitive wages. And then they are able to obtain mastery, particularly in the trade. But what is exciting about Tennessee's approach to apprenticeship is just not what we've always known as being the trade. We're seeing apprenticeships in things like IT and healthcare. Tennessee is launching what we're so proud of in partnership with the Department of Education, a teacher's apprenticeship. I mean, who thinks about a teacher apprenticeship? But it's an apprenticeable occupation. There's really no occupation right now that's not apprenticeable. And we have assembled an amazing, and yes, I'm biased, but I think one of the best apprenticeship teams in the country who are working very hard to tell employers if there's a need, and succession planning is a key part of this as well. We can build out an apprenticeship program for you that will not just attract workers, but also help you with retention, because we know that's also a key benefit of apprenticeship. This is an all-in strategy for us. It's not the only strategy, and it's important to know apprenticeship may not work for every single organization, but for those that have really vested in apprenticeship, it has done well for them. And more importantly, we want folks to know that apprenticeship is there for everyone. We are putting a lot of focus around diversity and inclusion of minorities and of women in apprenticeship programs, particularly non-traditional sectors. It is always so exciting when I get to see women in welding programs and in programs that typically are not what we call normal women occupations. Those barriers are starting to come down. And so, apprenticeship really is an opportunity to cast a very wide net for a lot of people and give them industry recognized credentials that will be needed now and in the future.
So if someone's interested in finding an apprenticeship here in Tennessee, where is there do they go on the tn.gov website? How do they locate different apprenticeships?
Apprenticeshiptn.gov. They can go into tn.gov/workforce. We have all sorts of information on our website and also on the apprenticeship website that really is a step-by-step guide, both for the individual and for employers, because we find as well that we have employers that say, well, listen, I've heard about apprenticeship, but I don't know how to get started. And so we have toolkits and resources that can help both individuals and businesses.
So go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, speaking of that, and I think you may have kind of answered this, but how's the state making it easier for job seekers to find those services that might lead to employment or remove barriers to employment? Is the state of Tennessee doing anything to help workers find those services?
Yeah, and our flagships obviously are the American Job Centers that are across the entire state. But we also recognize with the pandemic, we had to learn to serve differently as well. And so we launched in December of 2020 a virtual American Job Center. And so our virtual American Job Center is a way for individuals from the safety and confines of their home to be able to still get those critical services that they would ordinarily get in a brick and mortar location. And that ensures that no one feels left out, right? That people can still take part in services. And I think with that, I mentioned career exploration and guidance being so important, and really helping our folks understand that a lot of getting folks back to work is going to be a guided conversation around what is the data suggesting, because we don't want folks to get in occupations that are shrinking or declining. So really having guided conversations about what is the data suggesting to you, what are the key earning potential for certain occupations, and more importantly, the wraparound supports that are more readily available during the pandemic, such as childcare assistance, transportation assistance. Those things are important. And even for those that are looking to go back into post-secondary, help to buy your books. Those supports are available. And so we want folks to know that you don't have to start this journey by yourself, that there are resources both in conversation and both in action that can help mitigate some of those barriers to kind of help you get on to your next career or your first career.
Do these wraparound supports include things like, resume building, assistance with applications, just looking for the right fit? just, yeah.
All of those things. We offer resume prep. We offer interview prep. We partnered with a software that started about 2 years ago that allows you to really record yourself. So let's say you're interviewing for a job as a welder. It'll ask you welder related questions and you can record yourself and then play it back to get comfort with interviewing. And so we offer interview prep, resume prep, workshops on if you're not sure how to dress for the day. All sorts of those things are offered both in a class and in a one-on-one session setting, excuse me. And as I mentioned, a lot of those services are starting to be offered virtually as well. And so you don't have to physically go into a location to get them.
That's awesome, because I think sometimes, you have adults and you have high school kids that don't really know what to wear to a job interview, or how early they should arrive for the interview, or what a cover letter looks like. That typically isn't, taught in school. Maybe nowadays it is, but when I was in high school, I learned that stuff just because I spoke to, my parents and aunts and uncles, and they kind of gave me that type of education. But I know there's a lot of adults and young people that might go into a job interview with ripped jeans on, thinking that that's okay. But if we don't give them that kind of education and share that information, how else would they know? So I think that's awesome. There's a program set aside to do that.
Yeah, and listen, I think there's a recasting of that as well, because I think for a lot of us that have been working in our fluffy slippers during the pandemic, there's an opportunity to help people remember not to wear that back to the office. So
Yeah.
I think even for those of us that are coming out of the pandemic, just we've been, and in a lot of ways it's been very intense, but also relaxed in the workforce. And so, especially around new employees, who I really have a soft spot for, because people that were hired during the pandemic don't necessarily get the robust orientation and sort of the on-ramp that they would typically get when we were all in virtual space. So it's like, I'm coming into an organization and I'm new and I've landed this first job and now I don't see anybody. So how do I get acclimated? So we're there to help in that regard as well, because it's more about just getting the job. It's about keeping it as well. And so there are also resources that can help you kind of right size yourself once you're able to get gainfully employed as well.
Are the American Job Centers in Memphis open in West Tennessee areas? Are they open? And what kind of services can someone find at these centers?
So yes, the centers are open and ready to serve in Greater Memphis, and they have been for quite some time. And I really want to thank the folks there, the local board in the Mid-South community, for what they have done to ensure that they were positioned to help folks during this critical time. So yes, they are ready to assist you with all the services that we've talked about, plus some. The important thing to know about the American Job Centers is that there are partners that are there as well. So it's more than just labor and local providers. We have human services there that can help you. If you are a SNAP recipient, there are services there for you. We have vocational rehabilitation there, because it's very important to get our friends in the disability community gainfully employed as well. So there's all types of partner programs and services there at the American Job Centers. And yes, they're open and ready to serve you today.
That's great. Do you have any final thoughts for our listening audience before we leave today?
First of all, I just want to thank you, Dr. Shaw and Dr. West, so much for having me on. Workforce is something that I so firmly believe in for our state. It's a way out for so many individuals. But I would just say, to everyone, hold on. It's been a tough time. It's been a tumultuous time, but your next career is just right around the corner, and we're here to help you do that. You don't have to figure this out by yourself. Jobsfortn.gov is a tremendous site that has tons of labor market information. It allows you to research, and this is not information that was always at our fingertips. So if you're curious about what that could look like, go on, visit the site, talk to some of our folks across the area, and find out how we can help you accomplish your dreams and goals. Don't stop dreaming. We're here to help them become a reality, but do it safely and do it responsibly. And we hope that our department can continue to serve you now and in the future.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Thomas. We appreciate you. We appreciate the information that you've provided. And we appreciate you guys for choosing to come back every Saturday and spend this hour with us. And we look forward to seeing you on next Saturday. Same chat place, same chat time. We'll see you then.